12 hours.
Zog the Heilige Gemara. Zog the Heilige Gemara.
Finish, please.
Everyone's listening to you. Zog the Heilige Gemara. Taner Rabbanim. Oitrois Melachim Lemelech. If there was a war and we captured the king's royal jewels, we captured the king's royal possessions, they're Lemelech. That goes exclusively to the Melech Yisrael who did the capturing. The Sharbis are Shabbozin, and the other spoils of war, Mechzel Melech Mechzel Am, it goes half and half. So when the Mishnah said, V'chol ha'am boizin v'noistim loy, the amount that he gets is half. He's entitled to half of all of the spoils. The king's coffers get half of the spoils of war. Amalei Abaye l'Ravdimi v'amilo l'Ravacha v'shlama oitrus malachim l'melech. That I understand. Urcha demilsa. Where should the crown jewels go? Naturally to the king. Elashar biza shaboizin mechzel melech or mechzel minolam. How do we know that the king is entitled to half of the spoils of war? Dichsiv, because it says in the pasuk, turning on to Daf Chaf Aleph Amud Aleph, today's Daf. Vayim shecheyu laHashem Hakadosh Baruch Hu is Moshe Shlomo Melech laHashem ulenogid as a leader, uletzadek hakoyin as a koyin. Uletzadek hakoyin. The lashon of the pasuk is vayochlu vayishtu lefnei Hashem vayoim hahu v'simcha gedola vayamlichu shenis l'shloimoi ben David vayimshechu Hashem l'nogid uletzadek hakoyin. So we're comparing the Malchus of Shlomo Melech to the Kahuna of Tzadok HaKohen. Ma Tzadok mech tzaloi umech tzalach. Half goes to him and half goes to his brothers. And it's referring to the Lechem Aponim, that the Kohen Gadol, if he wants, is entitled to take half of all of the Lechem Aponim. Af Nagid, so too the leader, the Melech, mech tzaloi umech tzalach. The tzaddik gufay minol. And how do you know tzaddik was entitled to half? How do you know the Kohen is entitled to half of the lechem upon him? The Tanya Rabbi Omer v'oisha la'aron l'banov, which is referring to the lechem upon him. Mechzel la'aron u'mechzel l'ban. Gewaltig. Work at hard. I know it. Lehin malach elam shakol le'roy. Gnei. Zok the Gemara weiter. Zok the Heilige Mishnah. Lo yarba lo yinosh. A king is not allowed to have too many wives. Ela shmona asrei. A moderate amount of women, only 18. He's allowed to have more women. As long as they're not going to turn away his heart. There's two ways to understand this comment of Rabbi Yehuda. There's one way to understand it, that he's arguing on the Tanna Kama. The Tanna Kama says, 18 is a hard cutoff. Rabbi Yehuda says, if they're not Mesiras Liboy, 18 is not a hard cutoff. Even if he has one wife who could stray his heart, he's not even allowed to have one. So the portion of Pshat is that it's a three-way machlokes. But there are those Rishonim, actually most Rishonim learn it's not a three-way machlokes. Tosfos learns in many places that it's a two-way machlokes, and Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon are arguing in how to understand the Tanna Kama. Rabbi Yehuda said, the Tanna Kama said, Lo Yarbe Lo Yashlo Shmona Esrei, those 18, even if they're allowed, they're only allowed if they're not going to be Meshul Liboy. And Rabbi Shimon says, even one would be usher if she's Mesiras Liboy. So according to Rabbi Shimon, what is Lo Yarbe Lo Noshim? Ta'afilu Kavigail. Even if he has wives that are holy, like Avigail, nevertheless, 18 is still the maximum cutoff. So that's really the discussion they're showing him when Rabbi Yehuda, does Rabbi Yehuda's comments argue on the comment and allow more than 18 or not? Zok the Gemara, Lememra, the Rabbi Yehuda Dorish time of the crow. It must be that Rabbi Yehuda's Dorish time of the crow, because the whole reason why a king may not have more than not a lot of wives. The Torah doesn't say 18. The whole reason why the Torah says Lo Yarbe Lo Noshim is because of Hasaras Leiv. And that time of the Kra means, since that's the reason, if the reason wouldn't apply in this case, then then you wouldn't stick to that rule. That's what Yehuda said, right? If they're good women, you can marry more. Rab Shimon Loidar's time is called. And Rab Shimon says, no, the pasuk says 18, it's 18. The problem is, we know all over Shas, it's Rab Shimon who's Dar's time of the crop, and it's Rab Yehuda who's not. The Tanya we learned, Almana, Ben She'eniya, Ben She'ashira. An Almana, whether she's poor or wealthy, Ein Mimashkin Denoisa. If she owes money, if she's the loiva, you're not allowed to take a mashkin from her. Shenemar loisach oil beged almana. Divrei Rabbi Yehuda. And it's Rabbi Shimon who's Dar's time of the Kra, and he says it only applies to a woman who's an aniyah, not a woman who's an ashira. Rabbi Shimon Omer ashira memashkenoisa. It's only the aniyah that's ein memashkenoisa. Why? Because we have to chayav lahachsula. If let's say you take her night begadim, then every evening you have to come to her home and visit her to return those night begadim, and then every morning you're going to have to come to pick up those night begadim. It's not good. It's not a good look for a woman, a single woman, who every evening and every morning there's someone seen at her door. You're going to make her a bad reputation, and therefore it's not allowed. But a rich woman who has plenty of clothing won't need you to return the beged. So if Shimon is Darish time in the crop, the Torah doesn't say that the reason why you don't take a mashkin from an almana is because of it'll make her look bad. Torah says it's dumb, and if Shimon dies in time of the crop, and based on that, he actually says there's an exception to the rule by Nisha Shira. And therefore, Alma, what do you see? It's Rabbi Yehuda who's loydarish time of the crop. Because Rabbi Yehuda said that no matter what, you may not take a mashkin from the almana. Rabbi Shimon Darish time of the Quran. If Shimon is one who's Darish time of the Quran, therefore limited this halacha only to an almana and a niyah. Zok to Gemara, no. Alma Rabbi Yehuda loy Darish time of the Quran. Really, Rabbi Yehuda doesn't Darish time of the Quran, and that explains why he holds, regardless, you're not allowed to take a mashkin from an almana. But the shiny hacha, the mefarish time of the Quran. Here the Torah itself explains why a melech may not have too many wives. The pasuk itself says, "Ma tam lo yarba lo noshim mishum de lo yasser levavai." It says so beferish. The Torah says so beferish the reason. When the Torah says so beferish, there Rabbi Yehuda would agree that if it's not a situation of a sorry slave, then the melech may have more wives. So you would think Rabbi Shimon holds even if the Torah doesn't tell you darshan time of the Quran. Hold again if the Torah tells you. Rabbi Shimon Amalach Michti. Be almost darshin on time of the Quran. We know the rule across Shas that the default is that you're allowed to think in to explain why the Torah made a certain prohibition, and you're allowed to apply that to say that the prohibition wouldn't apply if the reason doesn't apply. If that was the case across the board, including in this case of Loyar B'Leinoshim, Imkein Lichtlev Kro Loyar B'Leinoshim V'Lishtlev. Why did the Torah in this particular case by the king tell us the reason? I would have made that same calculation anyway, if it's a standard default case, and I would have allowed the king to have more wives if there's no chash of a sorry slave. Matam lo yarba mishum de lo yaser. So lo yaser lomali. Why did the Torah have to speak out lo yaser? The reason to tell you a chiddush that I feel achas umasir es libo yareza lo yisena. Elamani mekayim lo yarba. So what does it mean lo yarba? Da afilu kavigayol. You're not allowed to have more than 18. Okay, gewaltig. So this is a very, very interesting shaila about Tarshin time of the Krah, because there's a halacha by takonos. This is a question of a deraisa, but there's a big shaila by takonos. This is a raid bite, but a beautiful stickle. And when there's a takana made, another person is not allowed to be mevatel the takana. But sometimes you find that they are mevatel the takana. For instance, there was once upon a time a takana made that a kohen cannot duchen if he has colored hands, if he has paint on the sands, if there's something on the sands that will be a spectacle that will make people want to look at it. The Messiah Yosef says that nowadays, where the kohen when he's duchening keeps his hands on the talis, you don't see it anyway. Nowadays, a kohen, even with colorful hands, can do them. The question is, you can't on your own just do away with a takana.
I don't think they were talesim in the base of Migdash.
That's why they made the takana. That's what the
Right,
says.
right.
Nowadays, since we do it under the talus, so it's not negating. But the Beis Yosef is basically willy-nilly disposing of a takanach hakadmonim. How was he able to do that? So I believe the Chavetz Chaim, not Chavetz Chaim, I believe that the Chavetz Chaim says this, that the only time, first of all, why is it that sometimes the Chachamim say a reason for the takana and sometimes not? Why is that way? So I think the Chavetz Chaim says that when they are being mevatla chiv d'oraisa, there's a chiv d'oraisa to do, right? When they're telling you don't follow a chiv d'oraisa, then they have to say the reason, and if the reason no longer applies, you have to say that they should continue to do it, because they're not going to be mevatla chiv asay unless right now there's a relevant reason. So whenever you find that the reason is given for a specific takana, you'll always be mevatel that takana if the reason no longer applies.
Isn't there always a reason for a takana? You can't just pick out and make a takana in a vacuum. There has to be a reason,
no,
and
there
that
always
people
is
know
a reason.
about.
The question is if the chachamim officially publicize the reason.
It's usually triggered by some kind of event, a story, something happened, and therefore they make a takana.
But sometimes they make the takana and they don't say the reason, even though, of course, there was a reason. And sometimes it's built into the takana. Why? And when it's built, and when do they build it into the takana? When do they actually explain? Sometimes the Gemara will say, this happened, they made this takana. But sometimes the Gemara will say that they said, we're making this takana because we want to avoid A, B, and C. And whenever they're making a takana and they're speaking out, they want about A, B, and C. Why do they do that? They do that because it's a case where they're being mevatla derais. Because of that, the Welt asks, why is it that we don't blow shofar on Shabbos? Why don't we lay in the Megillah on Shabbos? And why don't we? What's the third thing we don't do on Shabbos? We don't blow shofar. We don't want the Megillah. What?
Esrig.
And we don't shake the lulav on Shabbos, right? These are mitzvahs d'oraisis, right? And over there, the whole reason why we don't do it is because we're afraid that maybe someone's not going to know how to do it, and he's going to take it to his Rebbe to learn, and that'll be carrying. Nowadays, where we come out, do not have Rosh Hashanah's d'oraisa, right? That's why we're allowed to make erevin. So, oy bezoy, how come we're not mevatel that takana? I don't know the answer, but that's one of the big kashas that the Achronim discuss, because based on this yisoid of the Chavetz Chaim, that when they're being mevatla d'oraisa, they have to say the reason, which exactly how they made it. The they said the reason. It's Shema Yavirenet al Ramas. So why is it that nowadays? We don't shake lulav and we don't blow shofar on Shabbos, because nowadays we come out and have Rosh Hashanah d'oraisa. Unless the reason is that we do have, but that's one of the discussions that they have. But where do you get this from? Where do we get this from? That sometimes it's explained, sometimes it's not explained. Really, this Gemara is a makar for that, because in this prohibition that it's a derisive prohibition, you see the Torah speaks out and sometimes the Torah doesn't. So you see this variation of when they speak out the reason and when not. This was not a raid bite. This was a Raz's book out. Borchin said something very interesting. There's another famous takana that Chachama made. The Chachama made a takana that you should not read or learn L'or HaNer on Shabbos. Why not? Because Shemayate, you might adjust the flame so you can see better. And who was the Tana who felt that wouldn't be applicable to him? There was a Tana who thought it wouldn't be applicable to him, and he'll be careful. And what happened? He learned L'or HaNer, and he was nichshel. And he said the Chachamim were smart to say that you shouldn't read L'or HaNer, and since I was over, I'm going to have to bring a chatos shmeina. I'm going to have to bring a beautiful korban chatos. When Mashiach comes and we have a Beis Hamikdash. So he said over from the Vilna Gaon a beautiful shtickle. When I don't remember who the Tana was. Nobody remembers the Tana who was mated in there by mistake. So he said that the Chachamim said that you shouldn't read La'araner. So what he said was the Chachamim gave the reason, and the Balta gave the reason. I myself made the calculation that it shouldn't be relevant to me. I wish the Chachamim wouldn't have given the reason. I think that's how the Gra learns the words that he said. I wish they wouldn't have given the reason, because if they didn't give the reason, then I wouldn't have been able to make my own cheshbon and allow myself to read La'araner, and I wouldn't have been nichshel. So there's a certain stringency in a takana that's made without giving a reason, and that is that you can't on your own figure out some way why it wouldn't be relevant to you. Zok to Gemara weiter. Hani shmoina asra min olam. Where do you get 18? Where did the number 18 come from? All the Torah says is lo yarba lo noshim. Who picked the number 18? Min olam. Dichsiv. Like if you'd ask me to say lo yarba lo noshim, how much is too much? I would say 1. Right? So Zok to Gemara dichsiv vayoldu lo.
He meant to say 1 more.
No, I know what I meant. Shmuel always tries to salvage my marriage. No, the Chsiv vayoldu leDavid bonim bechevron. They gave birth to children for David in Chevron. Let's have a look. See, today's shtickle, David told he's going to love. You are going to love this one. So where is it? Hey, I can barely see. Hey is over here. It is. It's very important over here. We're going to read this. It's a long passage. Vayivoldu David banim bechevron. Vahi bechoyroi Amnon. Who was the mother of Amnon? La'achinoyam hayizraelis. Umishneu. Who else was there? There was Kilob, who was his mother. La'avigail Eishes Novel Hakarmi. Vashlishi. The third one was Avshalom ben Macha ben Talmai Melech Gishur. That was his third son. His fourth son, Ravi, was Adoniyah ben Chagis. V'chamishi, his fifth son, was Shvatya ben Avital. The Torah is telling us the mother of each of these sons. Vashishi, the sixth son, was Yisroam leEgla Eishes David. Was Yisroam, the son of Egla Eishes David. Ela Yoldu leDavid bechevron.
Why is that Eishes David?
I'm sorry.
Why is it why by her is it Eishes David?
I'm not sure. That's a good question. So let's have a look. Let's have a look at the Gemara weiter. So it says he had 6 children in Chevron. Israelis, Umishneyu Kalev, Avigail, Eishes Novel, Akarmi, Vashlishi Avshalom ben Macha, Varavi Adoniyah ben Chagis, Vachmishi Shvatya ben Avital, Vashishi Yisroim leEgla Eishes David, Ela Yoldu leDavid bechevron. The Karmel Navi, and the Navi told David, going back to the pasuk here, Navi said, "Va'edna lecha es beis adonecha." I'm going to give you the house of your master. Ves neshei adonecha b'chekecha. I think that was the pasuk quoted at the end of the Mishnah. Va'edna lecha es beis Yisrael v'Yehuda. The imat. If it's not enough, if you don't have enough wives, v'asifa lecha kahena v'chena. I'll give you double and triple of these noshim. So let's have a look at how the Gemara darshans this. The Chamal Navi imaat, if it's not enough, v'yisivalach kehena v'chahena. You know, it doesn't just talk about giving them wives. It talks about giving the bias. It talks about giving the bias too. So maybe it means if the house isn't big enough, I'll give you a bigger and bigger house. But the Gemara says going on in the shade. Minzburg once told me in Yerushalayim, where everyone has these big families, when they say by Motzei Shabbos, they say Zarenu, the Chaspenu Yabek Achoil, they put a big comma after Zarenu, the Chaspenu Yabek Achoil. So Vesivalach Kahena V'Chena. Kahena shiz. So Kahena, one Kahena would refer to another 6, because it listed off 6. Kahena is 6. The Kahena is also another 6. So what is 6 times 3? 18. The Avalu Tam Nesrei. Maskal Ravina. Who said this is how you interpret the Kahena V'Chena? Ema Kahena is Tartisrei. Maybe when it says Kahena, that means 12. And V'Chahena means to double what we have up until this point, and that would be a total of Esrin Varba. Tanya Namihachi. Lo yarba le'noshim yoshim me'esrim varba. So in fact, we have a shita who holds that 18 isn't the maximum number of wives for a king; it's actually 24. L'man de darish vav, and if you're darish in vav, arboim ushmoina hava, it should even be 48, 24 times 2, because it's vichain. So we even have a Tana who holds that a king is allowed to have 48 wives. The Tana Didan, my time. So our Tana, why did our Tana decide to learn that each kahena only represents 6 more? Amarav Kahana Makash Kahena Basra Likahena Kama. Makahena Kama Shis, Af Kahena Basra Shis. Anyway, today's shir is a shir that women can't listen to anyway. The thing that I said about one wife is too many, that's not even the beginning of it. Frag the Gemara, V'hava Michal. What about Michal? V'hava Michal. What about Michal? It lists off 6 wives that David has, but we know that one of his wives was Michal Bashol. And why was she omitted from this list? Amarav, this is another thing you should not try at home. Amarav, Egla zu Michal. When it said Egla, it means Michal because her nickname was Egla. V'lama nikra shma Egla. Why was she called Egla? Shechaviva love Egla. I love you, you're a cow, my dear wife. I'm not sure if that would work at home. I love you, you're the size of a calf. So these are things that David HaMelech called her Egla. The only way he got away with it is because he had 5 other wives. So she didn't like it, it was too bad. But his term of endearment for Michal was, Egla, come here, my little calf. Which is what Shimshon said, had you not tampered with my wife, and he referred to her as his calf. So that was like a term of endearment used to describe a wife. So Oibazoi, let's see who her son was. It was Yisraam. Yisraam was the child that Michal gave to David. So Michal had children. Did Michal have children? Michal Bashol she never had a child until the day she died. And the reason for that is when David was greeting the Aron, he was dancing like a child, jumping wild. Michal looked out the window and saw her husband seemingly making a fool out of himself, and she thought that was inappropriate. So that showed a slight disrespect for the honor of the Aron, and because of that, she was punished that she never had children. So, you're telling me she had a child. On Mabchista, the pasuk says, Ad yoy moisa hayala. But b'yoy moisa hayala, she had, on the day of her death, she did have children. She had a son, Yisram, but that child was born the day of her death because only Ad yoy moisa, the pasuk says she doesn't have. Frankly, that's not true. Michti, bonim heicha kachashuv. Where are we saying she gave birth? In Hebron. The Hebron, right? The pasuk says it was in Hebron. The ilu ma'isa the Michal b'Yushalayim have. The ma'isa of Michal happened in Yerushalayim. The chsivu Michal b'Ashol nishkava barachaloin v'teres hamelach David mefazes umecharker lefnei Hashem v'tovos. V'yomer Rabbi Yehuda, and Rabbi Yehuda says v'temer Rabbi Yosef shaklas Michal lemitrafsa. She got her einish there. So from that moment on, she didn't have children ever again. So clearly, this story in Hebron couldn't have been in Yerushalayim. So it says she had children, and at the end of her life she wasn't there. So where did this child come from? This Yisrael that was born to Michal was born before this story occurred in Hebron, and after that time, in fact, she never had children, even on the day of her death. Correct the Gemara. It says, "Vayikach David oid pilakshim v'noshim b'Yerushalayim." David took more wives and pilakshim in Yerushalayim. So it's more in Chanami. But lemilya shmoina asar. He only took up until the maximum quota of 18. He didn't go more. So we only listed off 6. In fact, there were more. Let's see if the bottom quotes the full pasuk. Because v'yikach David oid pilakshim v'noshim Yerushalayim achrei boy mechevron v'yivaldu oid l'David banim u'banois. Pashtus they are. But that'll be a big discussion as well. That was the other part of today's share that's censored. So if David, Oy Pilakshim, V'Noshim B'Yerushalayim, my Noshim and my Pilakshim. What are Noshim and what are Pilakshim? Amar Vidamarav, Noshim is Biksuba, Uve Kedushin. A wife, you give her a ksuba, you give her kedushin, it's a regular wife. But Pilakshim is beloy ksuba, uveloy kedushin. This, in and of itself, is a very big controversy because there are other places where it says that a Pilagish has kedushin and not ksuba. And you know who has no ksuba or no kedushin? A kadesha, a zayna, loisi a kadesha. You're not allowed to you're not allowed to just have relations with a woman without anything. Pilegish, which is allowed, has kedusha, not ksuba. So there's actually a steer that's asked in the Rambam, because in certain places he says that it's below ksuba, below kedusha, and in certain places he says you need to have kedusha. So the teretz that they explain the Rambam is there's a difference between the heter pilegish for a melech versus anybody else. Only a melech is allowed a pilegish below ksuba, below kedusha. However, and could be the Israel Kadesha is only if she's meyuchad and mezumelismus. But a woman who he has relations with, without ksuba, without kedushin, that would be a pilegesh. But a regular person would not be allowed to have a pilegesh without kedushin, but he could have one without ksuba. And there's many different pshatim in the word of pilegesh. It could be pal isha, a half of a wife. There's a lot of different ways that the word pilegesh is explained, but they all mean like a hybrid situation. So why is this such a hot topic? Because Rabbi Yonis and Eibeshitz, when he lived in the 1600s or 1700s, he wrote a whole tshuva promoting the concept of pilegish. He said if we allowed men to have pilakshim, it would stop the problem of people being mizana. People wouldn't have affairs anymore because men would be able to have a pilegish whenever they would want. So he actually has a big tshuva promoting that men should have pilakshim. So I'm not sure how that would go over. I decided that I'm not going to tell my wife about this tshuva from Rabbi Yonis and Eibeshitz, but he had a big tshuva strongly promoting that men should be able to have pilagishes. I don't think it took hold as a minhag in the community. Sorry? Over there? Nothing changed since we're about to learn about a rape. In the 1700s, I think. Yeah. So Zok to Gemara. Amar Rabbi Yehuda, we're going to learn very soon is they actually had a mechanism in the biblical times to prevent illicit relations occurring, and it will blow your mind. Amar Rabbi Yehuda Marav. Let's put it this way: it was so interesting that Rabbi Rosner just said Ayin Sham to see what it was, but I'm going to tell you what I saw. Amar Rabbi Yehuda Marav. Arba Meis Yolodim Hoyuloi LeDavid. David had 400 children. V'chulan b'nei Yefas Toyer Hoyu. They were all the children of Yefas Toyer, which means that he lived with 400 women. Umagadle Belorios Hoyu, and they all.
Why would it mean that? It could be some of them could have had multiple children.
Because you're not allowed to have more than one bia with this woman. So there's a discussion of that as well. I'm going to get into this. This is going to be what David's going to. You're going to love this shtickle, because we have a shtickle of Reuben Margolios who sort of proves that Arba Meis is a mistake.
Oh, it's an exaggeration. Yeah,
not even an exaggeration. It's actually a mistake, and he explains where the mistake comes from. Yeah. So B'nei Yefas Toyer Hayu. Umagadle Belorios Hayu. They dressed like goyim, had big troops. V'chulan Yoshvin B'kroinoi Shozov. They all sat in big chariots of gold. Umahalchem B'Rosh Gaisus. They would lead the armies of Klal Yisrael into war. They know you Bali a Greiten based over. They were the fist, the strong fist. They would be the tough men to soften up the opponents of Beis David. So the question that's asked is why in the world were David's children allowed to look this way? Just because they're going to war, they should look like Goyim? So it's brought down, Rabbi Rosen spoke out, it's brought down that David wanted all of the opposing armies to know that these 400 men were the children of Yefas, because that in and of itself would put panic amongst the ranks. If they would see a huge multitude of people that are all from women that were conquered in previous wars, the opponent will be terrified to fight because they know their wife might be next, right? And the next group of people leading the Israeli army into combat are going to be the children born from their wives. So because of that, David used that because it set fear amongst the ranks. That's number one. Number two, I'm sorry? It's very schwer to say that he had so many children, and even practically, it wouldn't work out. Because the halach is, you're only allowed to take one Yefas Toyer per war. You're not allowed to take 100 women and live with them during a war. The heter of Yefas Toyer is one per war. You know how many wars David fought? 18. So where in the world did 400 children come from? So he brings down from a Reuven Margolios, he goes through many sugis and shas where there were mistakes. For instance, the Gemara says that Rav lived for 200 years and Shmuel lived for 300 years. He talks about that Gemara. He talks about the Gemara where we had, maybe someone will remember what the name of the Tana was, and he was teaching his Talmidim, and he had an abundance of patience, and he would teach his Talmidim things 400 times. And there was a story where he had to go out to a bris, he had to go to a simcha, and he taught his Talmud something 400 times, and the Talmud still didn't get it. So he sat down with him, and he learned it with him another 400 times. There's such a Gemara about that. So he says it's very possible that in the early not prints even where it was written down, they used abbreviations, and it could have said Tisha. He could have here it's good as a Tisha, and they just used the letter Tuf with a little line above it with an apostrophe over it, referring to Tisha 9, and it was mistaken later into thinking that Tuf means 400. And that's how he wants to explain this Gemara, and that's how he explains the Gemara with Rav and Shmuel, because it makes more sense to say that one lived to 90, and one lived till 80. So the Tuf might just be referring to Tishim, and it was translated as 4, and the same thing with the Tuf could have meant 9 times or 90 times that he taught his Talmud, and it was changed because someone saw the Tuf, he thought it meant 400. So he argues that Arbimeus is because someone wrote Tuf and it just meant Tishim, it meant 90, or it meant Tisha or 9. That's how Reuven Margolis wants to learn. So it's very interesting how a lot of times we learn numbers that seem to be a huge amount. And up until now, we would default to what Reb David would say is that it's a guzma, but could be it was actually an editing mistake. From the letter Tov, which only meant Tishim, it was mistaken into being 400. Tamar bas Yefas Torah. Now Tamar was a daughter. Maybe we'll see. There's certain who will not like that, but Tamar was a daughter of a Yefas Torah, and she was the one who was violated by Amnon, who's a bad guy. Shenemar ba'ater, she told Amnon, why would you want to violate me if you could marry me in the proper fashion? Vani ana oilech escharposi, why would you be humiliate me like that? And you're going to also be a pariah that you violated me. Better, speak to the king, he will let you marry me fair and square. So that's how we know that she was the daughter of a Yefas Toyar, because normally a brother is not allowed to marry a sister. But she was saying, you would be allowed to marry me. If she was a Jewish woman, if Tamar's mother was a Jewish woman that David HaMelech married, there's no way she could have married him fair and square. But if she was a Bash Yefas Toyar, well, then she was Hayrasa Shaloi B'Kedusha. The Bia would have happened in the battlefield where her mother was a Goya, so they're not related. So it must be that she was a Bas Yifas Toyer, and they weren't related. Now, this is the subject of a huge tumult, because if someone finds a Yifas Toyer and he has a big title for in a war, is he allowed to be boiler before he's Megayer? Or is he only allowed to be boiler after they go through the process and then they're Megayer? And that's the subject of a big machloikus Rishonim. From the pashtus of this Gemara, it sounds very much like Rashi Shita, that in fact you could be boil her right away. And therefore she's still a Goya, and therefore the mother of Tamar was a Goya. Tosfos argues, and if we look at Tosfos, it's a long Tosfos, but we don't have to learn the whole Tosfos. I mixed up the sheetas. You're not allowed to oppress her during the war, meaning Pir Shaloy available Muhammad. Umash mitoich Pir Shakuntris. It's much from Rashi and Kedushin. Tafilu Bia Rishina Asura Bil Muhammad Ad La'acher Kolam Aisim Kula. But if that's the case, Vimkein Leba David Al Maicha Rak La'acher Shenis Gaira. Vimkein Basni Suni. Oibazoi, Tamar's a regular Jewish daughter of David HaMelech, and she was in fact Amnon's sister, and there's no way that marriage, that union would have ever been allowed. How would that have been allowed? What do you mean? We're not letting him. We're making him wait a month and being Megayer. That's not called Dibur Torah K'neged Yitzhara. The guy can't control himself. He needs it now. So therefore, the Kach Pir Shebei Tam Hasam Shlo Yachatzel B'Mulchama means Lava Yolah Bia Shnia. But Avada, you're allowed to make a Bia Rishayna right there. Umachlokes B'Yishalmi Ben Rav Shmuel. So he goes on, and the whole discussion if the Bia Shnia is allowed. Right? The Rav Amar Eina Muteris B'Mulchama Lo Bia Rishayna. Shmuel Amar Afloi Bia Rishayna V'Lo Bia Shnia. Okay. So then he goes on and he says, "So always if you can't catch Shmuel, according to Shmuel, you cannot have a bia shnia. You can't have a bia rishona or shnia. You can only make a bia afterwards. So therefore, it's going to be shver over here because when David lived with her, she was already migayeres. So it's a regular child. The Tamar loy bas David could be she wasn't bas David either. She imak for hoisemu beres kishabas l'machama." Maybe the mother was already pregnant from some goy even before she came into the Muhammad. So she was already conceived even before the Muhammad. She's not a Bas Melech. She's an illegitimate child of this woman from some goy. But we call her a Bas Melech. She grew up in royalty, so she was considered a Bas Melech, but really she might have been a regular goyish child. Okay. So that's how we know that Tamar must have been a Bas Yifas Toyar. Either the Bia was before Macha was Niskayer, or she was the actual child of a good. So that's why she was able to claim that her father would have let Amnon marry her. Well, Amnon Reya. Amnon had a friend, bad friend, an evil friend, Ushmo Yenadav ben Shima, Achi David Ishchach. And this man gave Amnon advice how to fulfill his lust, to be able to have an opportunity to violate his sister Tamar. Amar B'Damarav Ish Chacham L'Rsha. He was an evil, bad guy. And he said, Madua Ata Kacha, why do you look so down, my friend? Madua Ata Kacha Dal Ben Melech. Let me give you a good idea how you can get her alone so that you'll be able to violate her. Make believe like you're not sick, like you're not well. Make believe like you're sick, and ask that she should nurse you to health, and they'll send her in to nurse you, and it's inevitable that you'll have some private time with her, and you'll be able to pounce on her and take advantage. She will be the one who will help you get better. And she poured stuff before him. She cooked for him. She made him some fried stuff. Maybe she made him donuts. Maybe she made him good food. And then he violated her because he was there alone with her. And after he violated her, right after, he hated her. So the Baal Moshe say, yeah, you can have a huge taiva for somebody, and then you're over the Aveira, and afterwards there's a person you would run from. There's a person you would hate, you'd never want to be near. Why? Because it's a ava tluya b'davar. The moment that taiva goes away, this is a person you'll run to the other side of the street for. My timer, but the Gemara says there's a special reason why Amnon hated her. It's because she was no fool. She took her revenge. Amr Abitak Nima Nikshurloi, one of her hairs, stomach got caught around his aver. Vasu Krishuvka damaged his aver, and it permanently damaged him. She got him, but good. She didn't just give him a knee in between his legs. She permanently damaged him. If it just happened, Nikshurloi, so why would he be angry at her? It's not her fault. She caused it. So it's on this stickle that the Ben Yoda asked. I mean, what are the chances that from a hair from a hair over there, it's going to cause such a problem? It doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make any sense. So the Ben Yoda says a fascinating thing. The women in those days, if a girl was not married, so she wanted to repel people that would try to take advantage of her. So they would use a hairspray down there that would make the hair stand up like the quills of a porcupine. So therefore, nobody can have intimacy there because it would involve some painful pricks, right? No pun intended. So that was normal. And he knew that. Amnon knew that, and he was willing to absorb that pain. But what she did was, this is the Ben Yoda. She wove multiple pubic hairs together that it wasn't just a prick. They were like spears. There was like spears. So Mamela, when he tried getting close to her and doing what he wanted to do, she totally mutilated him. It's literally like he jumped into a bed full of knives. So it literally chopped his aver up to pieces. So she was one tough lady, right? And that's what happened. So that's why he was very angry at her, because it looked like it was the standard arrangement that a standard pool had. So it would just be a couple of pricks, but meanwhile it was deadly.
Would she have had anything for him to force someone to this?
In those days, things worked that way. Like you think all the relationship hastayers that they were married, they were happy too. So Zokmar, it says if someone violates a woman, right? That's the halacha. Fragma any is that so? The Adarish Rava, what do you mean they didn't have pubic hair? The Jewish women were beautiful. The women were clean shaven in those days, so they didn't have any of that by the Jewish women. Zokt Gemara, Shani Tamar, the Basya Fastoyer Havoy. Since she was a Basya Fastoyer, she didn't have all the minhagim of the regular Basulois, and therefore she had this porcupine protection system. Vatikach Tamar Ephal Rosh. She put ash on her head. She tore her beged. She was very sad. Tana Mishmei Rabbi Shua ben Karcha, Geder Godel Godra Tamar Ba'isha. Since she was violated, they made a special takana in that period of time. Amru, she said, or they said, Levnois Malachim Kach. If such a horrible thing could happen, even to the daughter of a king, Levnois said Yotais al Achas Kama V'Kama. Think of how vulnerable Jewish girls could be. She was a tnuah, girl. Leprutzois al Achas Kama V'Kama. So therefore they made it the takana. I'm going to be the rabbis to show Godru. That day they made Xera. We're not going to that. Al Hayichud Vala Pnuya. They were going on Yichud as Neshish and Al Pnuya. Frank the more Yichud I rise to. I'm going to be Yochid. I'm going to be Chodik. Ramesh Lo Yichud Natari Nine Shnemar Ki Yisischa Achicha Veni Mecha. But a story of Mesis, it says if your mother's son is Mesis you. Maybe your brother, maybe your father's son was Mesis you. What's the difference? Maybe it's a brother for your father. Ben a Mesis, Ben Av a Mesis, and a Loy Malach, Ben Misyach Lemimoy. It's normal for two sons to be alone with the mother. So therefore, your son, your brother with whom you share a mother will have more access to you. Vein Achar Misyached im Kol Arai Shabbatayr. You're allowed to be miyach with your mother, but with no one else, with no other arayas. So we already know the Isra Yichud. Then they made a gzer that even a pnuya cannot have yichud because of the ma'aseh that happened with Amnon and Tamar. He was saying, I'm going to take over. He said, I'm going to be the king. Amar Bidam Arab, you know what he did? He wanted to make covet for himself. Did you know that the crowns that were made for Malche based David would not fit on the heads of a commoner? Because they had a bar going across inside the crown. And all of the Malchus based David had a groove in their skull. So when you put the crown on, that bar fit into the groove. That probably David took the crown off because of that. So therefore, the Rashi. Yeah, look at Rashi. She because the Lama Vilama he wanted Sheteshev Beroisha Kesamach. So I loved it. It wouldn't go down. There was a bar that went across inside the crown, and therefore you wouldn't be able to properly see the crown on your head unless you literally have a trench running across your head. The he edus l'beis David. This was a edus that it only works for beis David. It will fit. So I'm thinking that's what it seems like. It seems like I'm thinking of doing that for my hat. Instead of writing my name on my hat, I'll just put a bar across, and then no one will be able to use it. But that's how they did. I'm not sure how that worked, but they had a groove in their head. I didn't make this up. Okay, Zog to Gemara Viter. So he tried to put the crown on, but it didn't work. So he needed to create himself fanfare. He made himself runners and chariots. He had 50 people running in front of him. My Rabusa, what's so special about that? They weren't regular people. They were tough as nails. They had their spleens taken out because Rashi says the spleen could make you feel sluggish. When you take the spleen out, it makes them supercharged. And the bottoms of their feet were cut off. I'm not sure, or there's no meat at the bottom of their feet. Could be they actually had like hard soles. They were born, they had hard soles, they didn't have soft skin, so they were able to run on rough terrain. They were able to run on thorns, it didn't hurt them. So the bottom of their feet were tough like a regular sole, so they were really tough, special people. Okay, should we try to go further? We're at 6:53. Or should we stop here? And I'll have to be mamshech tomorrow. But we have this long letter. But what should I have left out? The Ben Yoda? These are all negate the push of Shan the Gemara. We can.
I thought I had a good one for this year, but I think that's the story. I don't know. Maybe.
Okay, so we'll be mamshech tomorrow. We'll have to stop at the Mishnah and Mishnah tomorrow. I'll have to push on the